Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're unpacking a topic that we know many of you, our dedicated learners, have asked about. There's curiosity, maybe even a little bit of, well, apprehension around it, SwiftUI.
Indeed. And, we were looking at insights from this recent session by a real iOS pro, and it was striking, actually. He started with a poll.
Oh yeah, what did it show?
Well, about half the audience, 50%, had never even tried SwiftUI.
Wow.
Yeah, and a lot of the others only felt like a little bit confident. So it really makes you ask, why does this framework, which is meant to make things easier, still seem so daunting?
Exactly, and that's kind of our mission today, isn't it? To cut through some of that maybe fear or hesitation and show you that SwiftUI, yeah, it's new, but maybe not as intimidating as it looks.
Especially if you got that UI kit background.
Right. We want to unpack the core ideas, point out maybe some surprising similarities to what you already know, and look at why Apple even went down this road. Hopefully you'll walk away with a clearer picture, feeling a bit more ready to, dive in.
That's good.
So let's start with the person who led that session we mentioned, Kushal. He's got, what, 8-9 years in iOS?
Yeah, something like that. Currently at a big bank in Abu Dhabi, and he runs this thing called iOS Labs.
Okay. But what's really interesting, I thought, was his own start. He wasn't always an iOS guy.
No, not at all. He actually preferred Android and Java initially. Said he was sort of uncomfortable with the whole Apple ecosystem back in 2017, 2018, Macs weren't really everywhere in colleges then.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how did he get into iOS then?
Well, the crucial part was how he got trained for his first iOS gig at Raja Soft Labs. It was pretty basic Objective-C training.
How basic?
Like half an hour a day for maybe 6 or 7 days with assignments, senior reviews, that sort of thing. And then, get this, Swift, introduced on the very last day.
Seriously? For how long?
Maybe 15, 20 minutes, tops. And the message was basically, look, if you know Objective-C, Swift is super easy.
Huh. Okay, so let's unpack that. He really pushes learning through practice.
Right.
And looking at existing projects.
Totally. Not just coding from zero or watching endless tutorials. He specifically said his actual learning, his words, happened on a real project. It was for Vita, a U.S. healthcare startup.
Okay.
Yeah, he was building features from scratch, working with a lead, really diving into things like MVVM and RX.
So this brings up something important. He mentioned this idea of the tutorial trap.
Oh, yeah, he was very clear on that. Said watching 60-hour Udemy courses or tons of YouTube videos, just not effective for really learning.
So what's the alternative then?
Active learning, getting your hands dirty. He really advocates tackling existing code bases, contributing to projects. He's building an open source project with his current batch.
And the value there is?
Code reviews, getting feedback from senior engineers, understanding why things are done a certain way professionally. That's invaluable, You just don't get that context from a pre-recorded tutorial.
Okay. So bring this back to SwiftUI then. What's his message for people hesitant about it?
Pretty straightforward. SwiftUI is nothing to fear, very easy to map from UIKit. That's almost a direct quote.
Easy to map. How so?
Well, the core idea, and this is key, is that it's declarative.
Right. So instead of telling the app how to build the UI step by step.
Exactly. You just declare what you want the UI to look like based on the data you have. It's a different way of thinking, but often simpler once you get it.
And he mentioned direct equivalence.
Yeah, that's the helpful part for UIKit folks. So UI to view. That basically becomes list in SwiftUI UI collection view maps to lazy vgrid or lazy hgrid.
Okay, that makes sense.
And simpler stuff too. UI label is just text. UI text field is text field. Even things like UI switch, UI slider, UI image view, UI date picker.
They all have SwiftUI versions.
Yep. Toggle, slider, image, date picker. Pretty direct counterparts. Helps you bridge the gap,
So this is where it gets really interesting for me. Why did Apple do this? Why create SwiftUI in the first place? It wasn't broken, was it?
Well, broken is maybe strong, but our source, Kushal, explained Apple's goal was always to make things better. They weren't doing it just to shake things up. They look at app development speeds globally.
Ah, so it's about efficiency.
Partly, yeah. Remember Swift itself back in 2014-15? That came about because Objective-C felt, cluttered was the word he used. It was slowing things down.
Right.
So Swift was designed intentionally, borrowing good ideas from JavaScript, Java, C++, at Python, Go, trying to be a sort of best of language.
Okay, so Swift was step one, and SwiftUI.
SwiftUI, launched 2019, was step 2. Apple's move towards a, quote, better approach. And a big part of that was multi-platform.
Ah, the right once run anywhere dream, or
Yeah.
closer to it.
Sort of. Getting macOS, iOS, iPadOS, watchOS, tvOS all on the same page, using a more unified framework. And also optimizing development more, especially around things like animations and async await, which we should definitely talk about.
Definitely. But crucially, UIKit isn't dead, right?
Absolutely not. And Kushal really stressed this. UIKit is not deprecated. It's still everywhere. Tons of companies use it, especially for big existing legacy projects.
So advice for developers, especially newer ones.
Still need to know UIKit. Many companies haven't fully switched, or maybe never will for older apps. You got to be versatile.
Okay, good point. Now, something else really powerful in SwiftUI, ViewModifiers.
Oh, yeah, these are fantastic.
He described them as a protocol. What does that mean practically?
Yeah, basically it's a way to bundle up reusable styling and configuration. Think about UIKit for a second. How often do you write the same lines of code to set a font, a color, some padding, maybe a corner radius?
Ugh, all the time.
Yeah.
It's so repetitive.
Exactly. View modifiers are the answer to that. Instead of writing those, say, 4 lines of styling code over and over for every single text label or button,
You write it once.
you define it once as a view modifier. His example showed creating an extension on Vue that's the base type for UI elements with a function, maybe called value title.
Okay.
And inside that function, you put your specific font, your color, whatever. Then on any text element, you just add .value title at the end. Boom, styled.
And the demo he showed, that really drove it home.
It did, didn't it? He changed, like, the color from orange to pink in that one modifier definition.
And instantly everywhere he'd used .value title updated.
Right, or making text bold or italic. One change, updates everywhere. He figured like 24 extra lines of code could be cut down to just that one modifier call in many cases.
That's huge. Saves time, reduces errors, makes the code so much cleaner.
It really is a game changer for UI code reusability and maintenance.
Okay, so beyond just how things look, SwiftUI also tackles state management differently, doesn't it? In UIKit, that could get pretty manual unless you brought in something like RX or Combine.
Yeah, that's another big shift. SwiftUI has built-in ways to handle state changes and automatically update the UI. It uses these things called property wrappers, like @state.
@state, what's that for?
That's mainly for simple local view state. Like, is a toggle switch on or off? What's the current text in a search field? @state watches that property, and if it changes, SwiftUI automatically redraws the parts of the view that depend on it.
Okay, simple local state. What about more complex data? Passing stuff down to child views.
Right. For that, you've got observable object. You typically have a class conforming to this protocol holding your data, and you'd use @observedObject or a state object in your view to watch for changes in that object.
Gotcha. And for stuff that needs to be available like everywhere in the app, like the user's login status.
That's where @environmentObject comes in. It's super powerful. You inject an object high up in your view hierarchy, and then any view deeper down can just ask for it using @environmentObject. It's kind of like using user defaults or singletons, but integrated directly into SwiftUI's data flow and update mechanism. Very clean way to handle global-ish state.
Okay, state management sounds much more integrated. Now, my personal favorite topic you mentioned earlier, async await.
Ah, yes. Freedom from callback hell.
Exactly. Anyone who's dealt with nested completion handlers in UIKit for API calls knows that pain. It gets messy fast. Kushal had a comparison, right?
He did, and it was pretty stark. The old way, setting up URL session, data tasks, handling errors and completion blocks, remembering to dispatch back to the main thread for UI updates.
So much boilerplate. And easy to get wrong.
Totally. Lots of nesting, error handling scattered around, making sure you call dispatch_queue.main.async. With async await, it looks almost synchronous.
So?
You just create your URL, then you basically write try await URL session.shared.data from car URL. That line waits for the network call to finish without blocking the thread.
Okay.
Then you decode the data. The await keyword marks the suspension point. And error handling. It uses standard try-catch blocks, just like synchronous code.
So it reads top to bottom.
Pretty much. No more nested closures climbing across the screen. Debugging is way simpler because the execution flow is logical. It's just a massive improvement for readability, maintainability, sanity, really.
It sounds like a huge leap, although I guess older projects might still mix the old and new.
Oh, for sure. You'll definitely see code bases, especially larger ones, that use both completion handlers and async await, maybe bridging between them, so it's still good to understand both patterns.
Right. Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all mean for our listeners thinking about SwiftUI?
Well, hopefully what you've heard is that SwiftUI, it's not this terrifying monster. It's actually designed to be cleaner, faster, more intuitive in many ways.
Especially with things like view modifiers and async await,
Yeah.
making life easier.
Exactly. And those conceptual links back to UIKit, the lists, the texts, the toggles, they're stronger than people might realize. It makes that transition feel less like jumping off a cliff.
It smooths the path a bit.
Yeah. But it really comes back to that learning approach Kushal talked about, doesn't it? How do you actually do it?
Right, not just watching tutorials passively.
That tutorial trap he mentioned, it won't get you fluent. Real learning, real confidence, it comes from actually building things, getting hands-on practice.
Whether that's playing with an existing project or starting something small yourself.
Precisely. Maybe grab an open source SwiftUI project on GitHub. Or just try building a simple screen, make a fake API call using async await, try creating a couple of view modifiers.
Just experiment.
Yeah, it's that active engagement, that trial and error that makes the concepts really stick. That's how you turn understanding into a skill you can actually use.
Absolutely. We really want to encourage you to take that step, try it out.
And one last time, remember what Kushal said, SwiftUI is increasingly important as where things are heading, but
Knowing UIKit is still really valuable, especially if you're just starting out or looking for jobs right now.
exactly. The market still relies heavily on it. So thinking about everything we've dived into today, what's one thing that stands out to you? What are you curious to explore or try next?
Food for thought. Until next time, keep exploring, keep building, and remember, the absolute best way to understand this stuff
Yeah.
is just to do it.